All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everybody, and welcome to February's Workforce Wednesday. This month gives us an opportunity to celebrate and honor the contributions of African Americans throughout history during Black History Month. It's also National Cancer Prevention Month. So, in honor of both, I'd like to kick things off by highlighting the incredible work of Dr. Jane Cook Wright, often called the mother of chemotherapy. Dr. Wright pioneered the development of chemotherapy drugs as a viable treatment for cancer, work that transformed clinical oncology and expanded access to cancer care. Her groundbreaking research paved the way for generations of scientists and oncologists dedicated to saving lives. We are so excited to have you here for a conversation that truly matters. Check your filters, how biases shape feedback and leadership. I can only imagine the biases that Dr. Wright faced as she advanced in her career, yet she rose to the top, became the head of the Harlem Hospital Cancer Research Center at just 33 years old, later became the head of the Harlem Hospital Cancer Research Center, and serving as the director of cancer chemotherapy research at NYU Medical Center, associate dean at the New York Medical College, and ultimately the first woman president of the New York Cancer Society in 1971. Her story reminds us of why today's discussion on bias in leadership is so very important. My name is Jessica Miller, and I'm the Director of Workforce Strategy for the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development. And we are so happy that you're here with us today. If you're new here, thank you so much for joining us. And if you're returning, thank you for coming back. To kick things off, please let us know who you are, your role, wherever you work, and if you're so inclined, share one bias that you think that leaders need to be most aware of when giving feedback. And I will go first. Familiarity bias can trip us leaders up when we assume that we know someone's strengths or needs just because we've worked together for a really long time. Those assumptions can lead to overlooking growth opportunities or missing signs that support is needed. Checking the facts, not just your comfort level, can help keep the feedback fair and effective. Our team of consultants work regionally, which means that each consultant will have a slightly different way that they do their work based on the region and the employers that they're serving in those regions. But the common core ways that we support our employers are identified here. We work with you to identify gaps in your current strategies, ensure that you're connected with your local, regional, and state workforce partners, and we assist you in building strategies that will help you attract and retain workforce. As you'll learn today, our consultation process is rooted and informed by data and is developed specifically with your company's needs and goals in mind. We serve as your guide through the process and convene workforce partners for support, sharing training grant opportunities, and continually check to ensure progress is being made and assist in making adjustments along the way. When you work with us, you're working automatically with a connected and wide network of people and partners who work collaboratively for the success of our state, our regions, our communities, so that your business and our workforce can thrive. We do not do this work alone. It takes many people to bring success to these efforts, and a lot of them are here today in our audience. Our lineup for the 2026 registration is ready to go. You spoke and we listened and we incorporated your feedback into those topics. We'll continue to weave your needs into our sessions for the year. If a hot topic comes up or something new is on your mind, we're always happy to add a session. So keep speaking up, please. Let us know what you'd like more clarity on, what information you're looking for, a topic that you're curious to explore further, or if you've got a great idea for something that you'd like to share with our network of employers and partners. I'd also like to take a moment to encourage you to fill out the evaluation at the end of our time here together. We'll get that link popped in the chat for you. This is your perfect opportunity to share your thoughts on these sessions and let us know what you find valuable. As always, these webinars are recorded and available to view at any time via YouTube, as well as our careerforcemn.gov website, where you'll also find recordings and resources from this session, as well as all of our previous sessions. We'll be utilizing our chat feature today, as well as the Q&A feature located on the top menu bar throughout our time. Please ask questions, answer questions, interact with our guests, our consultants, the partners, and each other. We really want to continue to build upon the community that we started here, and we always welcome your engagement. We have a super packed agenda with speakers who have dedicated their careers to being change makers and culture shakers, and I'm so excited for you to meet them. So without further ado, it's my privilege to introduce you to the amazing and fabulous Adeshewa Adesiji, our Metro Workforce Strategy Consultant. Adeshewa.
Hey, thank you, Jessica. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending our February Workforce Wednesday webinar. As Jessica mentioned, my name is Adeshewa Adesiji. I am the Workforce Strategy Consultant for the Metro area. I am very excited about this topic, about the panelists. Hopefully, you will find value in today's webinar and be able to take this information back to your places of business and start, if you have not already, conversations about checking your filters. So let's go quickly over today's webinar agenda. So we'll talk about biases and filters, how one affects the other, biases in the employee life cycle, biases in leadership, biases in technology and AI, actions and strategies. It's more to it than just be less biased. We'll have our wonderful panel discussion with our experts, some takeaways, and then we will have an opportunity at the end for audiences to unmute their mics and ask the panelists and or the consultant team questions pertaining to this topic. So with that, let's go ahead. So I would like to say it's important for us to understand how biases affect filters when it comes to hiring, feedback, and leadership. In preparing for this webinar, the message that I continue to come across is that this intersects as psychology and workplace systems. The short version of this is biases act like invisible filters shaping who we are, how we interpret information, and what decisions feel reasonable, often without us realizing it. By reasonable, I mean the explanation or decision that feels logical, fair, and justified to the decision maker event if it's incomplete or biased. Why reasonable can be both dangerous and powerful. Remember, biases work best when they don't feel emotional, doesn't seem unfair, and comes with a logical explanation. Even smart, well-intentioned people can still make biased decisions. The reasoning, inside that biased frame. The issue isn't was the decision reasonable. Instead, it's reasonable according to what standards and apply to whom. A simple but revealing question. If a different person did the exact same thing, would my explanation still hold? So that's something to think about. I think that as you see the diagram, you have the evidence we ignore, we have our beliefs, and then as it intersects, you have the evidence that we believe. And once again, it comes down to, was a decision reasonable, or was it reasonable according to what standards and applied to whom? So biases shape every stage of the employee life cycle, often operating invisibly yet influencing critical decisions. In hiring, they can favor familiar backgrounds or perceived fit, limiting diversity and opportunity. During onboarding and development, assumptions about capability affects support and integration. Biases continue in performance management and promotions, where subjective standards can create uneven evaluations and limit advancement for some employees. Even in retention and exits, biases influence whose contributions are valued and whose concerns are heard. Because these filters feel logical or reasonable, they often go unnoticed. Addressing them requires intentional process, clear criteria, and ongoing reflection to ensure fairness and unlock the potential of all employees. So I think one of the misconceptions that we have when it comes to biases is you're going to face that during the beginning of the life cycle. Biases can appear throughout the entire employee life cycle. Once again, not only when you're attracting talent, when you're recruiting talent, when you're onboarding talent, but those biases can affect retaining that talent. It can affect the development of that talent, the retention of that talent, and then also offboarding. If there's two individuals that are offboarding or they're retiring, are you looking at one person's contribution more valuable than someone else's because of biases, and how does that affect your business in the future? So biases when it comes to attraction and recruitment. In the attraction and recruitment stage, biases play a powerful gatekeeping role. Often before candidates even realize they're being evaluated. While filters already exist, so you have the resumes, interviews, referrals, biases quietly distort those filters. Biases in early recruitment stages compounds over time. Who gets through the door determines who even gets a seat at the table. So when it comes to the attraction, job ads, employer branding, and referral networks, when screening, resume reviews, and application filters are vulnerable to unconscious biases. Selection, interviews often reward similarity and familiarity. Sorry, can't pronounce that. And then the outcome, you have qualified candidates from underrepresented groups are less likely to enter or progress through the pipeline, shrinking diversity before hiring decisions are even finalized. So definitely it's important to look at your biases, check your filters, especially at the attraction and recruitment. And as I mentioned before, biases show up throughout the employee life cycle. So biases with onboarding, retention, and development. So biases in these stages shape employees' experiences, their opportunities, and career paths. Biases in these three areas influence who feels supported, who gains access to growth opportunities, and ultimately who thrives or leaves. Creating equitable onboarding, retention, and development practices is essential to ensure that all employees can succeed and grow. These biases just don't affect individuals. It shapes the organization's talent, culture, and long-term success. And I would also add its reputation. So as I mentioned before, um, biases can also occur in onboarding, during retention, during development, and it does affect. If it affects turnover, it affects retention, it affects the diversity makeup of that company, and it does affect the reputation. If your company does not have a good reputation of supporting employees and having a positive workplace culture, that will eventually trickle down to people second guessing or having second thoughts about applying for any positions at your organization. So biases when it comes to offboarding and happy leavers. So biases in offboarding shapes how employees experience their exit. They share knowledge and access future opportunities. So some may feel valued and supported while others feel overlooked, affecting morale and perception of the organization. Biases can limit who transfers critical knowledge or receives positive references, which impacts teams' continuity and career prospects. Fair and inclusive offboarding practices help all employees leave feeling respected while protecting organizational reputation and maintaining a strong talent pipeline. So once again, offboarding, happy leavers, these biases can affect it in a sense that it impacts and it determines how much information is retained by that employer when that individual leaves. Going back to the scenario that I had mentioned earlier, if you have two individuals retiring and you look at person A as this is the person that has the knowledge that we want to retain for our company, person B might have similar or just as important knowledge, but because there's biases, that company might allow that person to leave without retaining that knowledge and that being passed down to current employees at their organizations. So biases in leadership. Biases influence who rises to leadership, whose voices are heard, and whose decisions shape the organization. This can lead to homogeneous leadership, overlooked talent, and inequitable opportunities for growth, affecting both organizational culture and performance. Biases in leadership influence who gets promoted, whose voices are amplified, and whose decision drives the organization. Biases in leadership doesn't just affect individuals, it shapes culture, limits organizational potential, and affects who succeeds and who stays and how decisions are made. So one of the things that I like to tell employers is, you know, if you are a B2C employer, so you're a business and you have consumers, today's consumers, um, they want to know that the company is a reflection of the consumer, that their consumer base, basically. And also, within leadership, uh, really quick story, there was a company that I worked for a couple of years ago, and it was in a predominantly, urban area. And um, you had kind of the front desk, you had the greeters, you had the administration, and that was specifically made up of the same demographics that they were serving in the community. But when you went behind the door, the leadership, the individuals that were making the decisions did not reflect the demographic makeup of the individuals in that community. And when it was found out, a lot of consumers were upset because they questioned, why would you only have some of the entry level, kind of that front facing positions available just for BIPOC people of color, but then leadership didn't reflect that. And so it's important for businesses to look at not only diversifying your talent pool, but also looking at diversifying your leadership. For like I mentioned, right now, for a lot of people, that is just as important. They want to make sure that the company that they're doing business with, that they're giving money to, is open and is giving opportunities to BIPOC, women, veterans, individuals with disabilities, what have you, the same opportunities for potential leadership in their company as someone that doesn't fit into any of those buckets. So biases in technology and AI. I know that, now AI is a really hot topic. As I was putting this together, that was one of the things that came up is, can there be biases in AI? Everyone is really they're looking at AI as being that um the word I'm looking for is just the remedy to, everything, with the biases, or with AI, we're going to get rid of biases. It's going to be, more actual and factual and things like that. But, you can have biases in AI just as well. It doesn't eliminate it. AI doesn't eliminate biases. It scales it. Technology and AI systems can reflect and amplify human biases, influencing hiring, performance evaluation, promotions, workplace decisions. Without careful design and oversight, algorithms can reinforce inequities. It can also limit opportunities for underrepresented groups and perpetuate systematic discrimination. Anything from facial recognition to hiring and criminal justice, AI systems reflect human patterns. Remember, humans program AI. And this often disadvantaging, like women and people of color. Addressing this is a leadership responsibility. It's not just a technical one. Here are a few examples that I found when doing research on this. Facial recognition can have less than 1% error for light-skinned men, but up to 34% for dark-skinned women. Hiring algorithms trained on historical data have downgraded resumes linked to women. And criminal justice tools have misclassified Black defendants as high risk nearly twice as often as white defendants. Even language and voice AI reflect societal biases, associating men with leadership and women with caring or producing twice the errors for Black speakers and white speakers. So, AI, as I mentioned, is based on a human program. And I think we don't understand or we don't realize sometimes is when AI is being programmed, we are unconsciously programming our biases into AI. So here are some actions and strategies. Biases can influence every stage of the employee journey, as I mentioned, from hiring and feedback to leadership development. Structured processes, diverse panels, and objective criteria can help reduce those obvious biases. But hidden biases can persist in referrals, informal feedback, soft skill evaluations, and high visibility opportunities. It's important that employers should actively check their filters by reflecting on assumptions, auditing data, and reviewing decision points to uncover these inequities. By addressing both visible and invisible sources of biases, organizations can promote fair hiring, more equitable performance feedback, inclusive leadership pipelines, and stronger overall engagement, retention, and organizational performance. So as you see, there are, you have to go beyond just be less biased. That's not a solution to the issue of biases and checking filters. So as you can see, when it comes to hiring and recruitment, feedback and performance, leadership and career development, and then checking your filters, just some things under those categories. So with that, we are now on to our panel discussion. I tried to go as fast as I can because I think that this is going to be a really great panel discussion. And excuse my voice, I should have some water next to me, but I don't. So anywho, what I'd like to do is have our wonderful panelists introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about themselves, and then we can go into the questions. So I will start with Rebecca.
Hi, everyone. I am Rebecca Slaby. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the executive director at AmazeWorks. We're a local nonprofit that supports healthy conversations around identity, difference, and bias, and creating organizational cultures of belonging. So good to be here. Thank you.
And next we'll have Joanne.
Hi, everyone. My name is Joanne Reek, she, her pronouns. I am the Vice President for Equity and Inclusion at Augsburg University. Augsburg is a small private liberal arts university, kind of in the shadow of the University of Minnesota Twin Cities West Bank. It's lovely to be here with you all.
Thank you. And next we have Kathleen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kathleen. I'm the Chief People Officer at Sunrise Banks. We are a community development financial institution and a B Corp. And I lead HR, marketing, learning, and our belonging practice.
And last but definitely not least, we have Namita. Did I pronounce that correct?
You did. Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Namita Ebeloy, and I am a director of talent and culture for Second Harvest Heartland. Within the talent and culture team, that includes talent acquisition, all of our learning and development, our inclusion strategies, and our employee listening strategies. Excited to be here with you today.
Thank you. Thank you. So let me stop sharing so we can get into the panel discussion. So thank you very much. So, Rebecca, I'm going to start with you. So, as I mentioned, when doing this research, one of the things I came across, and it was just new for me, was the thought of biases across the employee life cycle. Once again, we always focus on biases towards the front end when they're recruiting, the interviewing, but then we don't think of once you hire someone, those potential biases throughout their career in a particular company or even in that industry. Um, at what at which point or points, it could be more than one, in the employee life cycle, do you feel um, biases have the greatest impact and why?
Great question. I don't know about greatest impact. I think that's hard to say because I think it depends on the perspective. But I do think one of the biggest barriers within the employee life cycle in terms of kind of upward mobility is once we get into those leadership positions, as you had talked about already, is that once we move into management, supervision, C-suite positions, that I think it is harder for employees with non-dominant identities from historically marginalized backgrounds, people who perhaps don't have the traditional education backgrounds or work experience, who have the non-typical resumes. It's harder for them to break into those leadership positions. That's where we get those biases around the affinity biases, the confirmation bias, right? All of those things. That's where that's where our lack of networking and or lack of those having those strong networks who comes into place. That's where perhaps lack of mentorship comes into place, right? All of those things happen where those biases affect who gets into those leadership positions. And that's why those, often really C-suite positions end up being majority white folks and boards often majority white, and we satisfy ourselves saying, look, we have one BIPOC person, we have one person from the LGBTQ community, we're diverse because we have one token identity from these different groups, and then we pat ourselves on the back. So
Thank you. Let me open it up to the other panelists if anyone wants to chime in. Thank you so much. That was great, Rebecca. But anyone else would like to add or confirm, support what Rebecca's answer? Leave it open.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Definitely agree with a lot of what you said, Rebecca. Thanks for bringing it up at the leadership level, at the C-suite level. I want to go all the way back to talent acquisition. So at the very beginning, right, where doors either open or they don't. And so there's bias at every stage in the employee life cycle, and there's no denying that. And there's strategies to mitigate and support education and lessen the impact of bias at other stages. But I do think that at talent acquisition has a real opportunity to shape what an employee's experience is like, and then to also mitigate bias in that that very early stage. So examples of that are ensuring that you have a skills-based matrix so that as candidates are evaluated, they are evaluated based on objective measures and less on those subjective, this person feels right, or this person went to my school, or things like that. There are a lot of strategies that strong talent acquisition departments are able to employ to level the playing field so that individuals are able to rise to the top based on their skills and based on their experience, where they may have been filtered out if we were not focused on, can this person do the job? They might be coming from a non-traditional background or from a school you've never heard of, or have foreign qualifications. That doesn't That doesn't say anything about their skills or their capacity to do the job. And so we also in talent acquisition have the opportunity to influence hiring managers. And that's another piece that, either helps folks to get themselves in the door, but it also sets up conversations for later. And then I'll, talk about also panel interviews, really strategically thinking about who is involved in the interviewing process and ensuring that you bring together a culturally competent team to interview. Um, Candidates so that you have outcomes where you can challenge, what ratings each of those individuals gave particular candidates. And you can sit down and you can say, tell me about your experience with X candidate. I noticed you rated them low on skill A and B. And those types of conversations really mitigate unconscious bias, because if you can't justify your decisions, we know that the research shows that if you're asked to justify decisions, if you're asked to provide objective data, you are more likely to rely on facts and evidence rather than bias. So that's a lot about talent acquisition, but I also just want to say that, what? We close doors when we don't do talent acquisition right. And then there's no opportunity to move up and, be developed, be coached, be mentored. So I'll pass it on to one of my other panelists, but I am passionate about that entry into the workforce.
Well, let me just say before any of the panelists respond, one of the pieces of information or data that I received from our LMI office is if you look at it at a city, county, region, or state level in Minnesota, despite the current climate, we are going to be diverse. I mean, the diversity is continuing. We're going to be a diverse state, which means diverse residents, a diverse workforce. And, when you said closing those doors, if you continue to have biases and those filters affect your hiring or all the stages within the employee life cycle, an employer is doing more harm than good because you're closing doors. You only have so many people that you can close doors on before you turn around and say, where is the talent. There is a saying that I found from, it was a director of one of the workforce boards in another state, and it says something along the lines of, you ignore 50% of the talent and then you wonder why you're in a war, when it comes to searching for talent. Because you're ignoring them, and when you push people away, it's very hard to get that relationship back with them because they remember that. And so when you said just shutting doors, that just kind of clicks. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah,
and it's not about me, it's
absolutely.
about the panelists. So I won't be talking too much. So,
But just one point that you said, that I want to also point out, in addition to, this isn't just about non-dominant identities, but there's a comment in the chat about majority extrovert, right? So then we know that there's an extroversion bias. I'll add to that military, right? Our veterans whose resumes don't often reflect the skills that they have. And so that's another place where individuals who can contribute wonderfully to our workforce are shut out early on.
and I'll say shout out to some veterans in the audience. I saw a few that I recognize that are currently in the audience. So yes, I definitely agree. So Joanne, Kathleen,
Yeah,
did
sure.
they say everything or you want to add? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that being aware is the number one key. So the way that I like to think about it is bias shows up most where discretion is the highest and accountability is the lowest. And if we look at where those places are, they're at transition points. So when we think about hiring, promotion, or like a high stake evaluation, those are examples of some places where we should just know off the top of our head that we're going to have to be extra extra, what's the word I'm looking for, vigilant, where we're going to want to review the notes and understandings that we have about when and where and how bias shows up, and be doing a cross check to whether any of those hints are showing up for us. If we look at evaluations, for example, why is this a place where we need to be extra vigilant? Well, number one, they're reoccurring. So the opportunity for bias to show its head is baked into the fact that we're an organization that needs to give evaluation. So it's a place where it's high stakes, it's happening all the time. That's where our focus should be. Also, looking at places that are narrative heavy. So when we get into storytelling, or when we get into explaining subjectively how we feel about either an individual or their work or their resume or anything that they're bringing to the table, whenever it's narrative heavy, we're going to need to pay attention more to our lenses. And then the other place that came up for me when the fellow panelists were speaking, when decisions are tied to pay or advancement, that's another place I feel like where we would want to make sure that we keep our eyes open, because that's where a lot of narrative will come into play, especially if we don't have predetermined criteria that we are sticking to with every candidate, no matter what. So just a few things that I was thinking about as Rebecca and Namita were sharing.
Thank you. Kathleen, anything to add, or?
No, I think my colleagues have covered it all.
Thank you. I was looking at the audience as you guys were talking, and someone had mentioned generational biases. So, I'd like to acknowledge that that's something that does affect too. You're either an old dog that can't be taught a new trick, or you're young and you're wet behind the ears, and your frontal vortex hasn't fully developed, so you can't you don't have the ability to do the work that's been assigned to you. And so, I want to mention that generational biases is also a bias that affects it. It can and it does affect employers in the development of their talent pool and their workplace culture. So there was someone else in the audience, Liz Lawrence, who mentioned that she is a person in tech. So I saw that and I was like, okay, let me segue. This is a great opportunity to segue into the next question. And so I focused briefly on biases in technology and AI, and how AI sometimes can be programmed based on human biases. Those that are programming AI don't realize that they are also programming their biases into whatever programs they're developing. While AI tools can be well-intentioned, they can also intentionally reinforce systematic biases. I need some water. Systematic biases. How should companies that are looking at using AI in the future, when it comes to recruiting, retaining, offboarding, how should organizations and employers anticipate and tackle this potential issue? And so I will open it up to anyone who wants to answer that question.
Yeah, I'll jump in and just say that I think ensuring that job postings are not biased in their language. Because if you load that into AI, you're simply going to teach AI perhaps that it is a masculine job, and then it's going to filter, accordingly, because you're teaching it things. And there are tools too. There's a really great tool called Textio that reads documents and calls out, if the language is skewed one way or another.
Mm-hmm. Do you mind maybe putting that in the chat? That would be a great resource. Thank you. Anyone else? I mean, how do you feel, or what do you think employers should do to kind of tackle this head on before it becomes a problem? If they see, okay, there might be a potential issue with AI and implementing some biases when it's when it's being used for recruiting, for retaining, for offboarding, you know, what are things organizations should do beyond what, or besides what Kathleen just mentioned?
Well, I'm gonna say the quiet part out loud and
Please do.
and actually say that we shouldn't be relying on AI to do the human part, which is, HR is human resources, and the hiring and the actually, like, if we're hiring people to do the work of our organizations and our companies, then we should actually do the human part, which is to talk to people, to screen, look at people's resumes, to actually do the interviewing, to do the onboarding. I think, the way to mitigate the bias is actually to do the human part of reflecting on our own biases and checking in with each other about that, and not rely on AI to do that for us. Because we are imperfect and we're going to build imperfect AI. And then we are only going to just reinforce that through the AI, and then not even be able to check what we're missing through AI. So that's what I think. And companies that are investing a lot of money in AI are not going to appreciate me saying that, but that's what I think.
I think you're not alone in that thought. And I like that you said HR is human resources. And it's, AI is very factual, whereas, I always say when it comes to people, it's never black and white. There's always areas of gray. And I think the challenge is, can AI be programmed to have those areas of gray when it comes to the recruiting, the retention, and offboarding? Is it possible, or is it just it's black and white? It's this or it's the other. Um, I believe it has been posted in the chat already, but there is a great article about I believe it was Amazon that tried to use AI and realize it did not work out to their advantage. So to my colleague, who I believe it was James, posting the articles in the chat, if you can find that one and repost it, so it's a newer post, I would definitely recommend people to read it. It was interesting. It was very interesting. So anyone else want to put? Oh yes, go ahead.
Well, the other thing that I want to say too, and this is what I think AI misses, is that, and actually what I think we're missing in how we're hiring anyway, is that there are, we too often hire for experience and, like, education level, and where we should be in skill sets, instead of kind of disposition and mindset. Because I think there's a lot of things that we can train for, and that, because of how, unfortunately, systems of oppression are working and how our education system is working, that I think people with disabilities, people, LGBTQ plus, and then BIPOC folks aren't able to get the skills and experience in the same way that can be trained on the job, right? And so how are we in our job descriptions being clear, like, in creating kind of mentorship and then on the job training, and distinguishing, like, what are the things what's the mindset and kind of the disposition we can hire for, as opposed to, like, what are things that we can train people on the job, so we're developing our workforce. Because otherwise, again, like, the biases around what the kind of person that we're hiring for. We're just replicating, and we're gatekeeping a whole bunch of people who maybe haven't had access to the same kind of opportunities. And I think that's also really important, and AI is not going to be able to detect for that as well. And so it's a completely different way of thinking about hiring as well. Right. So yeah, I think skills can be taught. That's what Chip is saying, right? Skills can be taught, right? Versus attitude, values, right? All of those kinds of things. I think that's a different way of looking at hiring as well. So.
Great. Okay. Can I just say this conversation is going much better than I thought. Thank you, ladies. I'm like, I want to just stop, and I'm kind of leaning in because I'm just listening, and I'm like, okay, who's gonna say something profound next? You all have been just wonderful. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So let me go to action strategies and accountability. So I put the quote in the presentation, just be aware or just be less biased. Like that seems to be kind of the go-to, how to combat, how to resolve, how to eliminate biases. Well, okay, we'll just be less biased. We all know that it takes more than that. It takes more than just saying, okay, just, it's almost like, oh, you fell down and scraped your knee. All right, drink some, put some Robitussin on it. It'll be okay. It doesn't fit. It doesn't fit. Okay. That was a joke. If everyone knows, what joke that goes back to. But anyway, beyond just being like aware or just being less biased, what steps can individuals or teams take to counteract these biases? I know that some of them were all already mentioned, but just kind of maybe doing a deeper dive, are there things that an individual can do versus what a team can do versus what a leadership can do? Like how to, just that the day-to-day biases, how to tackle those. What are some suggestions and some ideas from the panelists?
So I'll jump in. I think that, well, first of all, we know that an organization is never going to be more inclusive than their leader because leaders set the stage, leaders set the tone. And so the first place there is ensuring that your leaders have access to a significant leadership development program that has that has all sorts of opportunities built in to grow their cultural competence, right? Um, and so our leaders are our first sort of line of defense because, as we all know in different teams that we have worked on, what is allowed sets the worst of the culture. And so when leaders are culturally competent and speak to acceptable behaviors and how we interact with folks, and when leaders call out bias, it shapes the way that the team interacts. So, that's one strategy. But another strategy is for folks that are in the audience, don't wait for a leadership development program or a cultural competence or a DEI training, right? There is a lot that individuals can do that is available out there. There's a ton of books on unconscious bias that are either easy to read or I'm thinking like the very heavy duty textbooks, but then there's some very easy books like Filter Shift, for example. It's one of our local authors that wrote that. Easy read stories to help to raise awareness. And then if you prefer the other side of it, I mean, there's, very significant body of research around how unconscious bias works and where it shows up. And you can certainly, pick anything across that spectrum. LinkedIn Learning has fabulous courses specifically on unconscious bias, multiple great courses there. And so, I always say to folks like, don't wait for that next training. Don't wait for that next consultant to come in and offer something to you, right? Don't wait for your BIPOC colleague to educate you because that is not their role either. And your role is about developing yourself and uncovering what you have, and uncovering your own biases, right? That's the first part of the process. But we don't get to awareness until we are in the higher stages of cultural competence. The earlier stages of cultural competence, what we know is that biases are below the surface. They are so unconscious that you can tell people to just be aware, but they're not aware, and they can't be aware until they are developed through cultural competence to a stage where you can say, you know what, I'm going to check my own bias here. I'm feeling bias creep up, and I'm going to check it. Or I'm seeing bias creep up in a meeting, and I'm going to check it. That happens in those later stages, but in order to get there, we still need, a lot of time and a lot of commitment and a lot of hard work as individuals, not relying on anyone else.
Nice.
One thing that I think that is going back to your question about what can individuals do and overall what organizations can do. So it sounds kind of like that seems like a off the top of my head, I could have thought of that, but it's really pause before really important decisions. The quicker that we go through decisions, the more likely bias is to step in. The further that we are away from a break, it might seem silly, but the further we are from having like a meal, so the more tired, run down, stressed, you name it, the further that we get away from being our tip top self is when bias tends to creep in. There was a 2011 study called the Hungry Judges Effect, and what it was talking about is that as parole judges moved further away from eating or having a break, the chances of the person them talking to receiving parole went from like 65% down to 0, almost completely connected to how far they were from a break. And so when you are looking at resumes, when you are completing an evaluation, your best time to not have as much bias creep in and to have your critical thinking on point is when you're refreshed and when you are ready to use all of your mind, your factories. The other thing, so something to keep in mind for individuals, as far as organizations, there's a couple things you can do when they're all connected to measurement. So go ahead and find that data and promotion rate information, like look into it, see where there's dips, see where there's patterns. Also look at time to advancement for folks based on social and cultural identities. Actually take a look and do comparisons. Look at the differences of feedback quality between people in different social and cultural identities. How much is on their perceived behavior as opposed to their work output? And then also, of course, look at retention by group. So those are some real things that an organization can do, and then something to keep in mind for individuals when you're in charge of those important decisions.
I want to add 2 thoughts to the conversation. The first is in response to some comments and insights that are happening in the chat, and that is around values and how to measure those things. So I would encourage everyone to take a really hard look at your values and then ask, how does that show up with behavior? And then build a rubric that says, this is needs improvement, this is solid contributor, and this is exceeds. Because then it's very clear to everyone, what is it that we're talking about? And obviously vet that with some employee group that's cross-functional, that's cross-cultural, etc. Because I think this is my second point, the more transparent and navigable systems that exist, you start to chip away at bias, because bias can absolutely live in a system that's poorly built, but it absolutely lives in the absence of a system. So if you don't have a system for promotions, if you don't have a system or a formal program for job shadowing and mentorship, then bias is going to live there, and people are
Mhm.
going to feel that it's favoritism or those things that are very real. So I think the more systems and formal things that are built, you start to chip away at it.
I'm just writing down some notes. I like that is the need to have a system in place, or there increases the potential of biases living in that space. I mean, yes, as my counterpart James mentioned, very insightful, Kathleen, very insightful. And I just want to say, Namita, I like going back to your comments on the leadership. You know, you can't be more inclusive than your leader. It's like that trickle down, like, the biases, the inability or unwillingness to check your filters at the leadership, it eventually trickles down. It's that trickle down effect. And then I also that you mentioned, you said, what we allow sets up the company culture, sets up, how someone is going to be treated in that space. And it's really important for, leadership to be inclusive and to kind of lead a positive company culture. I always say that outside of personal life, an employee spends, a large amount of their hours in a day is work related. And so employees, it's not the same as them being at home, but they want to be in that environment where they're comfortable, where they don't have to come across biases, and that they get respect and support from management and leadership. And, I mean, there's been tons of articles, tons of studies that says that increases productivity. Why some companies still don't decide to check their filters and allow biases to still occur, I don't know why, knowing that has a negative effect on companies' morale and their productivity, but nevertheless, it's something that still is occurring. So we're almost at the end of our panel. So I want to ask one question for everyone, and just really a quick answer. What's one actionable step you think, for people in the audience, what's one, yes, for the people in the audience, panelists, what's one actionable step um, you think that they can implement immediately, regardless of where they're at? If they're not in leadership, if they're not in management, maybe they're just an employee at the company, what can they implement immediately to hold themselves accountable, to not contribute to any biases, to check their filters, as they interact with coworkers in the workplace? What is, one thing that you think that they can do immediately to reduce that bias and effective biases?
Ask yourself if you're making an assumption.
All right.
I think it's remember that we all have biases. It doesn't make you a bad person. It just makes you human. Uh, to pause and remember you're not responsible for your first thought. It's usually biased and an assumption. You are responsible for your second thought and the actions that you take.
Rebecca, ooh, you stole mine, and then you made it even prettier.
And I was like,
I'm
Rebecca,
gonna,
she's been on fire, like in
I
the
know.
notes and in the yes.
I'm gonna go old school since Rebecca took mine. The Harvard Implicit Bias Test. It's online, it's free, and you would be surprised where your biases lay. And it really gives you a come to the light moment with and can you just tell you a lot about yourself that you don't know. And the way to make an unconscious bias go away is to make it conscious and then work on it. So I'm gonna go old school.
So, Joanne, if you could put the name of that test in the chat, that'd be great. Oh,
Oh,
I think we already have it. Yes.
James
I
is
know,
on
right?
it.
Between James and Rebecca, so.
I will add one quick thing, which is listen, right? Listen to the experience of your teammates if you're an individual contributor and believe them. Listen, if you're a leader, listen to and, take those pulse and engagement surveys and really pay attention to the data and then slice and dice the data to find out what the experience is like from department to leader, because we know that, that big giant chunk of data tells you a lot about broad swaths of the organization. But if you really want to make a difference with data, you have to look at smaller chunks. So what there's a question what that means. Believe them. What does that mean? Well, I'll give you an example. At a previous employer, where there was multiple buildings and people would be going between buildings and badging into every building. And gentlemen said, well, why is it that the security guard is stopping me 5 times in the last month, even though I have my badge, as I'm entering the building? It's this, repeated behavior like you don't belong here, right? And and that experience is in universities, it's in employers, it happens all the time. But a lot of times when somebody shares an experience like that, people will say, oh, maybe he was just having a bad day. Oh, maybe, it's that security guard. Or, oh, that couldn't possibly happen, right? And so those experiences get discounted, and then individuals stop telling you what their experiences are if you don't believe them. It's hard enough to talk about a negative experience that you've had in the workplace. So if you're sitting down with a colleague and they share a negative experience with you, even if it's something that where you say, oh, that couldn't possibly happen. Well, that's like you said, Rebecca, that's that first thought. And what's that second thought? Is tell me more. What was that like? How can I help? And so in some cases, you may not be able to help, but you may be able to escalate that to a leader. You may be able to pull in someone else, right, to support. And that's what I mean by believe them, because we just discount people's experiences. So listening deeply at all levels and then acting on feedback.
Okay. Thank you. So we are at the end of the panels, but there is one more thing I would like to share. And sorry, I can never do this smoothly. So just, some of the takeaways. Biases are not just personal, it's structural. Biases thrive under ambiguity and pressure. Consistency is the tell. And then biases are reinforced by narratives. So just some takeaways from this. So once again, I would like to thank our wonderful panelists, Namita, Joanne, Rebecca, Kathleen. Thank you so much for taking your time to be a part of this panel discussion, and then for our Unplugged, which is coming up next. With that, I would like to turn this over to my wonderful and very patient counterpart, Shayla Drake, who will be facilitating next month's Workforce Wednesday. With that, I'll have her take it away and talk about the topic. So Shayla, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Jayla. So great conversation today, and big thank you again to all our panelists for sharing their insights. And as always, we appreciate all the attendees' feedback. So please take a moment to complete the brief survey to help us to continue to provide you relevant content and improve these sessions, because I saw the chat. People are loving the session. So we're doing these sessions because of your feedback. So please do that survey. So for those of you that registered, the recording and the related resources will be sent out soon, and it will also be in the Workforce Wednesday archive for download. Registration is now open for next month's Workforce Wednesday. future-proofing, my words aren't working either today, Adeshewa, your workforce skills for 2030 and beyond. So what we're going to be doing is exploring how AI automation is reshaping skills requirements across industries statewide. So we're not talking about replacing people. We're talking about how AI is augmenting the workforce and helping be adaptable and having an adaptable workforce and being ready to use that technology and thrive and creating a workforce for 2030 and beyond. So that's going to be our Workforce Wednesday for next month. So please register for that. Next slide, we're going to be transitioning to
Okay. And let me just say, I'm sorry, I want to apologize. I just realized it says for 2023 and it should be for 2030 and beyond. So
should be for 2030. Yes.
Yes, 2030 and beyond. Too late to do future proofing for a year in the past. So with that, let me go to the next section. Next slide.
Yes. So with that, we're going to be allowing people to have their cameras and mics turned on. I believe those settings are changed, if I'm not mistaken. Let's see here. All right, those settings are changed. So if anyone has questions, feel free to raise your hands and you'll be able to ask a question. We'll call on you. But with that, I have my first question kind of picked out, kind of based on the conversations that we were just having. So my first question is how can teams kind of create an environment where colleagues kind of feel safe to challenge each other's assumptions or filters, right? So they need that place to feel safe in order to challenge each other's assumptions. So how do we create that environment to even feel safe to challenge those assumptions? Because I noticed in the chat, we had that supervisor where someone felt safe to call her out, right? So how do we create those places where people feel safe to do that to begin with?
So
I
I'll wrap.
think,
Go ahead, Kathleen.
I'm going to say, being a leader is sometimes like a parent and you're not supposed to have a favorite, but sometimes you just vibe with people differently than others. That's why I only have one kid. But I think planting a pushback, if you know you're going to be presenting something that maybe not everybody's going to agree with, like encourage a team member, so it starts getting modeled. Like let people model that it's safe. Your response is a normal, engagement and conversation with people. Because if people don't see it happen, they're never going to do it. So if leaders are colleagues and peers are doing it with each other, when it's happening up and down and across an organization, it becomes normalized. But they have to see it happen. So I think it's like getting people to come off of anonymous question asking is sometimes you have to plant folks.
Yeah, and what I was going to say is really it begins with inclusion, right? And so when I look at psychological safety, there's multiple models of psychological safety. And for me, the model that I prefer really is the Clark model, which begins with inclusion. And it's that we have to be able to feel completely a sense of completely that sense of belonging on our own team, that we are valued and cared about as an individual before we can get to the higher stages of psychological safety, of to be able to learn, to be able to take fulfillment in our work. And then there's that piece of intellectual friction, right? Is where you can say like, hey, you know what? I disagree with where you're trying to go. Help me understand the direction that you're taking. How can I learn more about this? Or what am I missing? Or here's an idea for you to consider, right? Encouraging dissent. Well, it's also providing, like you said, Kathleen, that encouragement of dissent, the practice of dissent, And all of that works if we have already established that foundation of I care about you, I value what you think, I value your work. And therefore, when you have an opinion that's different, right? I listen to it with that same level of respect.
A lot of the work that we do with organizations is about creating what we call a brave space instead of a safe space. And we talk about how you have to create kind of cultural norms, organizational cultural norms for how you're going to be together, and then how you operationalize those, which is really putting the behaviors, naming the specific behaviors. You know, we'll draw a lot uh, of our work from Brené Brown. She talks about operationalizing your values. So what are the behaviors that you're going to connect to the values, right? Kathleen talked about that. I wrote about that in chat. But you have to lay the groundwork for the culture that you're trying to create in your organization so that you can have those conversations, right? And I love Kathleen's idea about like planting that so that as a leader you can show that you are being transparent, that you're open to feedback, and those kind of things. But really, and I think Namita, you had talked about this, like it starts with the leaders and how leaders have to model the transparency, the humility. And, you know, a lot of leaders say they're open to feedback, and then in practice, they're not. And so we talk, a lot of our workshops in consulting with leaders is like not only how you give feedback, but how do you receive feedback, which is really kind of the groundwork for how do you respond to microaggressions. But you can't do that. You can't even start talking about microaggressions in the workplace until you create a culture where actually giving and receiving feedback is a norm.
Okay. So to feed off of that, it would sound like you would need to formalize then some type of education or information. So can leadership training effectively reduce bias, or is it mostly about ongoing practice and accountability, really, at that point?
Part. I'm going to say it's the second part.
Mhm.
So information is great, but if people aren't, it's like anything. We've all taken an Excel class, and then you don't use it, and I can't do a pivot table to save my life because I don't have to.
Mhm. Mhm.
I would argue that it's both. You know, and one of the things that I like to do with teams that I work with is start with an assessment. Start with the IDI, end with the IDI, and you can see measurable growth if you do the work. Now, individuals who don't do the work, who don't participate constructively in the dialogues, don't read the content that we share and bring themselves fully to that discussion, obviously aren't doing the work to be able to grow. But what we do see a lot is a lot of growth. We see when people commit to the work, and it's not just learning the theory, but it's really learning about yourself and going back to who am I, what values do I show up with, what are my own filters, right? And that sort of deep dive into the self before you understand someone else. It is theory and practice, but we do see growth. And I've, worked with groups for the last 20 years and have seen either, small amounts of growth or very large amounts of growth, depending on how they show up with it. Now, you can't just do that and then let it go, right? And so to Kathleen's point, like it needs to come back, and we need to continually bring back some of these discussions so that they don't fall away. And it's again practice, practice, with leadership team discussions, but also just sort of that reflective practice of I had this experience today with this particular, colleague or this experience out in the community, and reflecting upon what was the reaction that I had and how did I behave in that space, and did I react, with kindness and reflection, and did I mitigate my own biases? So a little bit of, introspection is part of all of this.
And I would just add that as a consultant, so outside of my work with Augsburg, the organizations, the teams, the departments that have been the most successful are the ones that have managed to make these types of conversations routine in their daily work. And so a lot of times I know that we all have, or I'm pretty sure that we've all had experience working for an institution or an organization where the DEI team or the multicultural life team or the marginalized folks, they'll bring up topics when we need to think about it, and they'll lead the discussion, or we'll have a training on that in a month. And so it's when we start to think about these things is put aside on a shelf for certain people and certain times to bring down and then talk about and explore and learn about and train on. But the folks that make these conversations, even if they start out a little crunchy, the ones that have it as a a part of their agenda are the ones that really start to create that environment where now it feels normal. And anybody that was uncomfortable in the beginning starts to be more comfortable because they know to expect it. They know that they've made it through uncomfortable conversations before, and on the other side they were still alive, and so now they're not as anxious about those conversations happening again. So I would say normalize the conversation and everybody being a part of it and bringing it up.
Well, and to that point, how can organizations then shift from like a bias awareness culture to like a culture of bias intervention and accountability? Because that's two different things. We're just going from being aware of what's going on and making sure we're aware of what's going on and recognizing what's going on to actually intervening and being accountable for what's going on. Like,
Kathleen,
If it's a expected behavior you call out in your value set, then you can hire, fire, and performance manage to that. And promote and, converse.
And I think the expected behavior needs to be put into your performance evaluations. Like this is part of how we do things here, right? That as part of the hire fire thing. But the other thing, and this is to kind of piggyback on what Joanne was saying too, is the only way that these conversations get normalized is if organizations are not afraid for it to get real messy first. Because what happens when we start to normalize conversations where there's like equity and we're like, okay, we're going to have brave conversations and maybe we'll talk about race, or maybe we're going to interrupt microaggressions and bias, and we'll actually start digging in. What I've seen again and again and again in organizations is particularly LGBTQ folks or BIPOC folks. I'll just name race, for example. BIPOC folks, and oftentimes we're working with majority white organizations or organizations where leadership is majority white. BIPOC folks will be like, oh, okay, wait a second. We're doing this. We're having brave conversation. Oh, we're going to talk about race. We're going to talk about equity. Okay. All right. Okay. And then they'll start naming all the things they have been silent about. And they're going to actually, all right, we're having these conversations. All right. And then you have white staff or white leadership being like, what? Wait, I thought things were going really great here. Wait, you're calling me racist? Oh, wait, but we've been doing all of these really good things, and here's how equity has been showing up. They're like, I thought we've done this and this, and there's defensiveness, there's fragility, or like people retreat, they get, you know, and they can't actually handle the conversation. And what I try to tell people is that things are going to get messy before they're going to get better. And you do not have the skills yet because you haven't practiced this yet. And it's going to feel hard. And what I've seen too often is that orgs retreat and they step away and they're like, nope, now there are all these problems since we started doing this work, and it was easier before. And they kind of go back to the way things were. And your BIPOC folks leave the organization, and then sometimes there are new BIPOC folks and they're like, okay, we're just not going to have the conversation anymore. It seems like we were doing okay. We can rest on our policies that look okay on paper. And that's what happens. And so that's a caution, right? When we talk about like actually having those conversations, you got to move through the messy part before things get better. And unfortunately, we're not there yet as a society and in a lot of workplaces.
Rebecca, that's spot on. And I'll just add that I think that this is where it's really important to have a facilitator who knows this work facilitate those conversations, because DEI training or DEI equity conversations done poorly do a great amount of harm. And so you definitely don't want to put someone in the position of having to lead a conversation on this topic who doesn't have the training, the background, the skills to do it. And there's a lot of wonderful people that can lead those conversations with great skill in our area. So just want to pause and say, oftentimes what also happens is sometimes you will see that the burden of leading that conversation gets placed on one of the BIPOC staff members, which is also not fair. And, and assumes that they're willing, able, and desire and want to step into that space. And that's a whole lot of assumptions to set up somebody for not being comfortable, successful, or staying within your organization.
Any other input on culture shift? So on this piece here, when we were talking a little bit, how would we prevent bias mitigation efforts from maybe shifting into becoming performative or tokenistic, when at some point it shifts into that point to where it feels performative or tokenistic and not genuine anymore? How can you prevent that?
So when you think about systems change, it has to be embedded at every level, right? So you have there's the upside down triangle. I have the image in my mind, the water systems for change model, where it is like the mental models. It's like the individual, how we are all kind of willing to recognize and grapple with and learn more about our own biases. And then top of the upside down triangle is the policies, the practices, the procedures, the resource flows, right? How is it embedded at that organizational, institutional, structural level? Things like our performance reviews, things like our hiring, and all of those kinds of things. But then it's also in the middle, it's the cultural relational level, right? So how is it that we're having these conversations, that we are interrupting bias and all of those things? And so equity, the how we are responding and how we are thinking about our own biases and our practices are like, that's embedded at every level. which prevents it as performative. We're not just putting an equity statement or a land acknowledgement on our website and calling it a day, that kind of thing. So
it's the continuous
Right.
interventions
Yeah.
which can prevent the performative nature.
right, we're not just, doing a training once a year,
Right.
that kind of thing.
We have anything else to add on that one? No. So when we were talking about the AI stuff, and because I have an AI session next month, I want to add this question for my own, selfish reasons. What responsibilities do like vendors and developers have to ensure that AI doesn't perpetuate biases? Do we have opinions on that? So where we feel like what responsibilities do developers and vendors have in ensuring that AI doesn't perpetuate biases?
I think it's a great question, but
Don't have a.
I think we have a responsibility to do as much research as possible
Mhm.
when we're thinking about deploying these tools. But I think based on the input, that everybody mentioned previously, is that you can teach AI bad things.
Yep.
I know it's sticky.
Yeah. So let me think about it like this. So how can we incentivize leaders to actively participate in bias reduction initiatives?
Well, there's tons of research um, around the case for belonging, right? That's what we talk about it because our mission is around equity and belonging, around the fact that it's just neuroscience and how our brains work. The fact is that when we are experiencing bias or a lack of belonging, when we are experiencing any sort of thing where we're feeling like our identities are not being seen, heard, and valued, our brains are not fully functioning, right? We're in amygdala hijack. We're in a fight, flight, freeze mode. We are distracted. We are multitasking. You can call it stereotype threat, amygdala hijack. There's lots of research around it. But because we are constantly trying to then figure out, like, where do I fit in? How will I feel affirmed? Or does anyone actually like me or respect me here? We can't fully function at our jobs. So we're less productive, we're less creative, we're less innovative. And so there's an actual bottom line for companies and organizations to create workplaces of belonging, and to mitigate bias. And so yes, there's tons of research out there. And if I had my wits about me right now, I would we have it here, like I have something, but I don't have it like easily just to put into chat right now. But
Yeah.
I'm not James. James has got it, but I don't. Anyway, but yeah, there's tons of research. So if companies were smart, they would figure it out, because your employees can't do their best work if they don't feel belonging and if they're dealing with bias. And that's just true for anybody. Right now, with everything that is happening in the Twin Cities right now, is I can tell you most of the people I talk to are not fully functioning right now, because of people are in crisis. So
So we have 1 minute left. We don't. We are out of time. I thought we had a minute and we were down to seconds. So with that, I want to thank you for the conversation and your time, and for everyone that hung around. It was a great conversation and a great session. Thank you for your time today, and thank you for being here. was a great
Thank you for
time.
the invitation.
Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Bye all.
Bye.
Bye.